The planet didn't have a proper name. It had a catalog number, Verac 9, Union Survey Division, filed under geologically inert, no commercial value, no habitation potential, no further assessment required. 14 words. That was all anyone had ever thought Verac 9 was worth. Marcus Hale figured that made two of them. He brought Mule down through the upper atmosphere just before local dawn, which didn't mean much because Verac 9 didn't have a sun worth the title, just a pale smear of light behind permanent cloud cover, the kind of gray that didn't change from morning to afternoon to night. The planet existed in one long, colorless exhale. The surface was ash and compressed rock and the occasional scar in the crust where something old had burned. There were no trees, no water, no wind. Nothing had happened here in a very long time. Marcus liked that about it. Mule was not a pretty ship. She was a Union surplus heavy salvage rig, originally built to strip ore from asteroid fields, retrofitted twice and repaired 3 times with parts that didn't quite match. She made a sound when she flew, a low, rhythmic clunk from the port stabilizer that Marcus had stopped noticing 6 months ago. The inside smelled like recycled air and instant coffee, and a faint chemical bite from the suit seals. There was a crack in the co-pilot seat where the padding had split. He'd taped it with cargo tape. The tape had started peeling. He didn't fix it. He sat in the pilot's seat and watched the surface of Verac 9 come up to meet him on the forward display. The terrain scanner ran its pass. Rock. More rock. A ridge system along the eastern quarter, compressed and fractured like something enormous, had pressed down on it from above, a long time ago. The metal detector came up quiet everywhere except one patch near that ridge. He'd found trace deposits before. Iron, mostly. Compressed nickel. Once, on a moon near the Keth border, he'd pulled up a decent cache of titanium alloy and sold it to a Union recycling depot for enough to fuel Mule for 4 months. This wasn't that kind of reading. He looked at the scanner again. The reading was not trace. He set Mule asterisk down 2 kilometers from the ridge, because the ground right up against it was too fractured to trust with her landing legs, and because 2 kilometers was close enough to walk but far enough that if something went wrong, he'd have time to think about it on the way back. He suited up in the airlock. The planet had atmosphere, technically, but not the kind you breathe for long, and stepped out onto the surface. The ash crunched under his boots. Each step left a clean print, sharp-edged, the way footprints hold in dry powder when there's no wind to soften them. He was the first thing that had walked here in a long time, maybe the first thing ever. He didn't let himself think about that. He walked. The ridge was bigger up close. Ridges always are. What had looked on the scanner like a compressed formation resolved as he got closer into something more deliberate, curves instead of breaks, angles that repeated too regularly for geology. He slowed down. He stood still for a moment, which was a habit left over from mine surveys, where the ground sometimes moved. His breath was loud in the suit. The ridge wasn't a ridge. It was an edge. He stepped back, looked up. His visor auto-adjusted for the flat light and he saw the shape of it, enormous, half buried under millennia of ash and collapsed rock, the leading edge of something vast and dark rising out of the surface of the planet like the prow of a drowned ship pressing up through shallow water. The exposed sections were smooth. Not worn smooth. Built smooth. The material was dark gray with a faint iridescent sheen that didn't match any Union alloy in his memory. The geometry was wrong in the way that precursor things were always wrong. Not impossible. Not even technically complex. Just slightly outside the vocabulary of shapes that normal engineering produced. Marcus stood there for what was probably 3 minutes. He said out loud to no one, right then. He walked around it. The exposed section was maybe 400 meters long. The buried section, he was guessing from the shape of the terrain deformation, the way the ridge system radiated outward from this point like something had come down very hard and been there ever since, was much, much larger. He'd studied precursor vessels in Union archives, the way salvagers studied things they'd never touch, theory, dimensions. Cataloged site reports from the 3 confirmed precursor locations in Union space, all of them stripped to nothing by the Union Science Directorate and classified before anyone independent could get within sensor range. This was not a stripped site. This was intact. He told himself he was walking around it to assess. That was the professional behavior. That was the trained behavior. He had a scanner. He was taking readings. He was filing them mentally for a report he would absolutely submit to the appropriate authorities as required under Union Salvage Statute 12 and its 17 subsections, which he had read once and remembered the way you remember the terms of a contract you sign because you don't have a choice. He kept walking. The ship, because it was a ship, he could see that now, the whole vast buried profile of it pressing up through the planet's skin, the way the land curved around it for kilometers in every direction like the ground itself had accepted the intrusion and organized accordingly, was enormous in a way that misfired something in his depth perception. He would look at a section, and his brain would file it as a structure of normal scale, maybe a building, maybe a large industrial installation. And then something would recalibrate. A feature he'd assessed as a door-sized rectangle revealed itself, by comparison to the terrain, to be the size of a Union cruiser's hangar bay, and the scale would reset. 14 kilometers. He came to that estimate in stages, checking his scanner readings and then checking them again, and the number kept coming out the same. The largest Union warship in current service was 3.2 kilometers. He knew that because he'd seen one once, in orbit above the Keth homeworld, and it had stopped conversation at the observation deck for a full minute. This was 14. He stood at what seemed to be the forward section. He was guessing. Precursor ships didn't follow standard orientation conventions, and there was a section of exposed hull that curved inward slightly, the geometry suggesting something intentional, a designed concavity in the armor. Not damage. Feature. He touched it. His gloved hand pressed against the hull material, and it was through the suit, through the insulated gloves, warm. Not ambient warm. Not the kind of residual heat a rock holds from a star it hasn't been near in geological ages. Warm the way metal is warm when there's power running through it somewhere deep inside. Warm like something alive in a resting state. Warm like a hand. He pulled his hand back. The concavity shifted. Not much, not dramatically. A section of hull the size of a large door recessed inward, the edges separating with a precision that made no sound, no hiss, no mechanical grind, nothing. Silence. And then a space where there had been solid hull, dark inside, and from somewhere in the dark a light came on. Not a bright light. A soft, deep amber like firelight filtered through old glass. It lit a corridor just wide enough to walk through. Marcus looked at it for a long time. He thought about Union Salvage Statute 12 and its 17 subsections. He thought about the enforcement cruiser that had impounded his last cargo because a manifest timestamp was 90 seconds off. He thought about the review board and the hearing and the Keth administrator who had looked at him the way you look at something stuck to your boot and asked him, in that flat bureaucratic tone the Union reserved for humans, whether he understood the severity of what he'd done. He thought about the 2 years he'd been out here since then, burning quiet roots between dead rocks, trading in trace metals and silence. He picked up his kit and walked in. The corridor ran straight for about 30 meters and then opened into a space his visor rendered as enormous. A chamber with a ceiling too high to see clearly in the amber light, walls that curved away on both sides. It was not a cargo bay. The surfaces were covered in what he first read as decoration, relief patterns cut into the walls in orderly rows, and then his eyes adjusted and he understood they were not decoration. Interfaces. Row after row of them, running floor to ceiling on every wall. The markings organized in groups and clusters with spacing that followed a logic he couldn't read but could feel, the way you feel grammar in a language you don't speak. There was structure here. There was intention. He moved deeper. There was a raised platform in the center of the chamber. On it, A single console, larger than the others, the markings denser, the surface material slightly different, darker, more matte. He walked to it. He looked at the markings. Something happened in his brain. It wasn't translation. He didn't suddenly understand the language. It was more like recognition. The way you recognize a tune before you remember the name. The markings were grouped in clusters of 10, subgrouped in tens of tens, arranged in hierarchies that followed a logic so basic, so structurally familiar, that he felt the shape of it before he could name the shape. Base 10. It was all base 10. He was an engineer. He had grown up on multiplication tables and metric conversions, and the decimal system that humanity had used for every calculation it had ever made. He'd never thought about it as a choice, the same way he'd never thought about breathing as a choice. It was just how numbers worked. Every species in the Galactic Union used base 12. The Keth, the Vral, the Maron, the Gal, 12. 12 fingers, 12 months in their calendars, 12 divisions in their mathematics. He'd had to relearn basic arithmetic when he'd first started working union contracts, converting between the systems, and it had felt that was the word he'd always used for it, asterisk wrong. Not difficult, wrong, like writing with the wrong hand. This didn't feel wrong. He put his hand on the console. Every interface on every wall came on. Not amber now. White. Bright and clean and steady, and for a moment Marcus did not move because the light was coming from everywhere at once, and the chamber was enormous, and he was alone in it, and every surface was alive. He stood very still. He was not afraid. That was the thing he would think about later, much later, lying in his bunk on asterisk mule with the lights off, that he had not been afraid. He should have been. Every training protocol he'd ever absorbed said that an unknown structure of unknown origin activating in response to your presence was a threat until proven otherwise. There were procedures. He knew the procedures. He had not been afraid. He had felt, standing in the light of a dead ship, waking up on a dead planet, something closer to the opposite. Like something that had been very quiet for a very long time had finally found a frequency it could use. He looked around the chamber. The interfaces hummed with light. The console under his hand was warm and solid and waiting. Right, he said, to the ship, to the empty chamber, to the amber-turned white light that was waiting for something from him. Let's see what you've got. The ship did not answer. Not yet. But somewhere deep in the structure, so far down he felt it more than heard it, something like a heartbeat started. Steady, patient. Like it had been waiting for exactly this long, and that was fine. The first night he slept in his suit, back against the console, because he didn't trust the ship's air and he didn't trust himself not to want to. He woke up and all the interfaces were still on. He'd half expected them to be dark again. Expected the whole thing to feel like a fever dream in the gray Verac 9 morning, the kind of thing a man alone too long starts building out of rock formations and wishful thinking. But the light was there, white and clean and steady, waiting. He went back to Mule Asterisk, made coffee, sat in the cracked co-pilot seat and looked at the whole readings on his scanner for a long time. Then he went back in. He did that for 3 weeks. The pattern of it became a kind of discipline: coffee, scanner check, walk to the ship, suit check at the iris inside. He mapped the accessible sections the way he mapped any new site, starting from what he could confirm and working outward. The first chamber, a corridor branching left. A second chamber larger, lined with what he eventually decided were engineering bays, not because they looked like engineering bays but because the layout rhymed with function. Somewhere to build things, somewhere to run them. He did not go deeper than he could trace back. Not yet. The interfaces didn't explain themselves. They didn't flash a tutorial or run an orientation sequence. They just existed, organized and patient, the markings grouped and layered in structures that he kept circling like a word on the tip of his tongue. He'd stand in front of a panel, and his eyes would move across the symbols, and something in the back of his engineering brain would tick, 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 not understanding, but the asterisk outline of understanding, the shape of where understanding would eventually sit. Base 10 was everywhere. He started writing things down on the back of salvage manifest forms because he hadn't packed an actual notebook because he'd expected trace metal, not this. Numbers, groupings, the relationships between clusters of symbols. He filled 6 forms on the first week and started on a 7th. On day 19, he called Yara. He almost didn't. Calling meant using the long-range relay, which meant a signal log, which meant a record. He sat with his thumb over the connection key for a while. He called her. She answered on the second ping, which meant she was in her office at the University of Lagos, because she was always in her office. She had the kind of dedication to work that other people called admirable, and that Marcus privately categorized as grief in a lab coat. "I thought you were dead," she said. "Not quite. Where are you?" "Verac 9. A pause. "That's not even a real planet." "No, but there's something on it." He held the scanner readout up to the camera. "I need you to tell me what this looks like to you." Another pause, longer. "Marcus." "I know. That's a precursor hull signature." "I know. That's a—" She stopped. He heard her chair, he heard her stand up. "How big?" 14 kilometers. The silence that followed was the kind you only get when someone is doing the math and not liking the answer. 14. 14. Marcus, the largest confirmed precursor vessel on record, is 3.1. "I know what the record is, Yara." "It's intact." "Fully." "How do you know it's fully intact?" "Because it let me in." The silence this time was different. Not math. Something closer to the feeling you get standing at the edge of something with no railing. "It let you in," she said. "The hull opened when I touched it. Interior systems are operational. There's an AI, I think there's an AI, it hasn't spoken yet, but there's something running." And Yara, he paused, looked at the manifest form covered in his own cramped handwriting. "The interface language, it's base 10. She said nothing for long enough that he checked the connection. "Base 10, she said. "All of it, every grouping, every hierarchical structure, every—" "Marcus, every species in the Union uses base 12. Precursor sites have always been assumed to follow." "I know what's assumed. I'm telling you what I'm looking at." Another silence, shorter this time. Yara processed things fast when she stopped arguing. "Send me your coordinates," she said. "Yara, send me your coordinates or I will find you through the long-range signal log, which you are aware I have access to." She did have access to it. She'd gotten it the same way she got most things, by being relentless in a direction most people found unreasonable, until the people standing in her way decided she was someone else's problem. He sent her the coordinates. She arrived 22 days later on a transport she'd chartered under a geological survey permit, which was Yara's version of subtlety. He met her at the landing site. She stepped off the ramp and looked past him at the ridge, at the exposed hull catching the gray light with that faint iridescent sheen, and she said nothing at all. She stood there for a full minute. Then, "Right, show me." He showed her. She moved through the first chamber the way she moved through everything, quick, precise, stopping at irregular intervals to look at something from 2 or 3 angles before moving on, like she was cross-referencing against an internal catalog. She was carrying a proper research scanner. She had actual notebooks, 3 of them. She'd also brought food that wasn't ration packs, which Marcus hadn't realized he'd been missing until the smell of it hit him. "The groupings," she said, standing in front of the main console. "I know. This isn't just base 10. This is Marcus. This is structured in decimal trees, hierarchical decimal logic. Every branching structure returns to a root of 10. She was writing already fast. Shorthand he'd never been able to read. This isn't coincidence. This isn't convergent design. This was asterisk built asterisk this way. "I know." She turned and looked at him. Why didn't you tell me about this 3 weeks ago? He looked at the manifest forms he'd been writing on, folded in his jacket pocket. I needed to be sure I wasn't crazy. You're at least 40% crazy. I needed to be sure the other 60% was working. She almost smiled, didn't quite. Your 60% was correct. She turned back to the console. The question is why? Why would a precursor vessel, 40,000 years old, conservatively, be built on based-in logic? No precursor site has ever. The console changed. Not dramatically. A section of the surface shifted, the markings rearranging slowly like sand settling into a new pattern. Both of them went still. Yara's pen stopped moving. The new arrangement held for a moment. Then a sound. Not mechanical, not the hiss of atmosphere or the vibration of a power system cycling. A voice, or the closest thing to a voice that something very old makes when it is trying to use frequencies a biological organism can process. Low, resonant, each syllable separated by slightly too much space, the way a person speaks a language they learned from a book and are now using for the first time in conversation. Inheritors. Plural, Marcus noticed that. The air in the chamber did something, not colder, not warmer, but denser asterisk, the way a room feels when someone important walks into it. We built in your mathematics, the voice said, because we knew you would be the ones to find it. Yara looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the console. We knew, the voice continued, because based-in cognition produces a specific architecture of thought, non-hierarchical, lateral, resistant to monostructure. In our observations of 112 spacefaring civilizations across 400,000 years, only 3 developed based-in mathematics as their native logic system. A pause. The other 2 did not survive their first contact with hierarchical power. The chamber was very quiet. You did, the voice said, though not without cost. That landed somewhere below the chest. Marcus did not look at Yara, he looked at the console. The surface was still. The markings were a configuration he hadn't seen before. What are you? Yara asked. A caretaker system. I have maintained this vessel through 4 extinction events, 2 galactic-scale wars, and 37,000 years of waiting. I do not have a name. The builders did not name things they considered functional, a beat. You may call me what you like. What did the builders call themselves? Yara asked. They didn't. They considered nomming oneself an act of territorial claim. They found the practice provincial. Marcus said, what does the ship do? The voice paused, not a processing pause, a considered one. Everything you need it to. That's not an answer. It is the only accurate one. This vessel was designed as a conditional instrument. Its capabilities are determined by what is needed, not what is wanted. I cannot give you a capabilities list because the list changes. Another pause. What I can tell you is that every system currently built on base 12 logic, every ship, every station, every weapons platform operated by the civilization you call the Galactic Union, is, from this vessel's perspective, a door with the key still in the lock. Yara's pen had stopped moving again. Marcus looked at the manifest forms in his pocket. 6 forms, covered in numbers that had ticked at the edge of understanding for 3 weeks. He'd filled them because the alternative was to sit still, and the thing he'd been running from on 6 months of quiet routes through dead rock systems did not respond well to sitting still. He hadn't let himself name what he was running from. He didn't name it now. The Union will come, he said. Yes, the voice said. When they find out this exists. They will come before they know what it is, the voice said. Power structures move toward anomalies. It is reflexive. They will not understand what they are approaching until they are already here. And when they get here, that, the voice said, will depend on what you decide before they arrive. The light in the chamber was steady and white, and the ship's heartbeat, that deep, below-hearing rhythm Marcus had felt on the first night, was running at the same pace it had run since he'd touched the hull. Patient, unmoved. like it had been waiting 40,000 years, and a few more weeks was nothing. Like it had been waiting for exactly one type of mind. Like it had always known it would be theirs. Marcus folded the manifest forms smaller and put them back in his pocket. He looked at Yara. She was looking at the console, jaw set the way it got when she was 3 steps ahead and didn't like where the path ended. He said, "We're going to need more people." She said, "I have a list." He almost laughed. He sent his first real coordinates, the true ones, not the false location reports he'd been filing that night. Not to the Union, not to any authority. To 4 names Yara gave him. The names of people the galaxy had thrown away. He figured that made them qualified. They came in on a geological survey permit, same as Yara. 4 of them, 1 transport, manifested as soil sample technicians, which none of them were, and which the permit office on Station Maron 7 had apparently not questioned because the permit fee had been paid in full and on time, which was more than most geological survey teams managed. Marcus met them at the landing site in the gray Verac 9 morning. He knew their files. Yara had sent them, 6 pages each, dense, the kind of files that read like a list of reasons a person had stopped being useful to the people in charge. Di-Young Cho, 31, former Union Weapons Systems engineer, blacklisted after he refused to sign off on a targeting algorithm that he said, in his formal complaint, could not distinguish a hospital ship from a military vessel at distances above 400 kilometers. The complaint had gone nowhere. His career had gone somewhere worse. Priya Nair, 40, former Earth Navy communications officer, discharged after a dispute over a signal suppression order she hadn't followed. She'd followed the signal instead. The signal had been a civilian distress call from a mining platform. The platform had been saved. Priya had been handed a discharge form and a handshake. Riku Tanaka, 28, propulsion engineer, blacklisted from every Union shipyard after publishing a paper arguing that Union drive core design had a catastrophic resonance flaw at high output. The paper had been retracted under pressure. 8 months later, a Union patrol cruiser had lost its drive core at high output and come apart in a shipping lane. The incident report had listed the cause as unexpected mechanical failure. And last, Dr. Amara Osai, who was Yara's younger sister and who had come because Yara had said please, and who was looking at Marcus with the specific expression of someone who has made a decision they haven't fully examined yet and would prefer not to do so now. She was a trauma surgeon. She was here because a crew without a medic was a collection of corpses on a slow schedule. Marcus looked at them. 4 people the galaxy had used up and set aside. He thought about that for exactly 1 second. "Right," he said, "come see what you signed up for." They didn't react the way he'd reacted. Cho stood in the first chamber for 40 seconds and then said, very quietly, "The weapons integration points on the port side, those aren't emitters. They're something else." He said it the way an engineer says something they're not ready to say out loud yet, like the thought came out before he gave it permission. Priya walked to the communications array. He hadn't identified it as a communications array. She did it in 11 minutes and ran her hand along the interface panels without touching them, the way you hover your hand over something hot to test the heat before you commit. Riku found the propulsion section and didn't come back for 4 hours. Amara looked at everything, said nothing, and then sat down cross-legged on the chamber floor and ate a protein bar, and watched the interfaces the way you watch a fire. The voice came on the second day. The same resonant patience, the same spaced syllables. It spoke to each of them in sequence, not simultaneously, not all at once, one at a time, like it was making introductions. What it said to each of them, Marcus didn't know. That conversation happened in whatever section of the ship they were working in, and nobody reported it back. Not that day, not later. He didn't ask. Some things a person keeps. What he noticed, after the voice spoke to them, they worked differently. Not harder, differently, like something had been switched from approximation to precision. 3 weeks of this. The ship was not broken. That was the thing Marcus had to keep reminding people who asked him to explain it, and the explanations were always vague, always technically a survey report, always filed under the geological permit that Yara kept renewing with cheerful fraudulence. The ship was not broken. It had been in stasis. Reactivation wasn't repair. It was closer to negotiation. You brought a system online. The ship assessed whether you'd done it correctly. If you hadn't, it didn't error. It waited. Patient the way stone is patient. And you went back and tried again. Riku called it arguing with a mountain. Cho said it was more like explaining yourself to a judge who has already read the case file. Priya said they were both wrong, and it was like tuning a radio that already knows what frequency it wants to be on. You're just moving the dial until you stop being the problem. Marcus wrote all 3 descriptions in the margin of a salvage form and didn't pick one. The systems came on in order. Life support first. The ship had decided they were staying, apparently. Then navigation. Then propulsion, which made Riku sit very still for 10 minutes and then go wash his face, which was the most emotionally expressive thing Marcus had ever seen him do. Then on day 22, the defensive grid. They knew it had come online because the scanner readings changed. A new layer appeared on every sensor sweep, wrapping the hull in something that didn't reflect or emit. It simply disagreed with incoming scan pulses. Not jammed, not blocked, just returned no information, like asking a question to a wall that had decided the question wasn't worth answering. Di-Young Cho looked at the readings for a long time. He said, "That's not a defensive grid." Marcus looked at him. "A defensive grid blocks things," Cho said. "This," he stopped, started again. "This decides things. There's an assessment layer. It's reading every incoming signal and making a choice about it." He set the scanner down, picked it up again. "It's not passive, it's aware." The ship, Marcus thought, was paying attention. It had been paying attention since he walked in. The Union cruiser arrived on day 26. It came down through Verac 9's cloud cover on a direct approach vector. No circling, no survey pass. Someone had filed a flag on the geological permit, maybe the renewal, maybe the fact that a second and third transport had landed at the same site in the same month, which was unusual for a dead rock with no commercial value. It was a mid-class enforcement cruiser. Union registration, Keth crew, about 400 meters long, which on any other day would have seemed like a significant amount of ship. Marcus was outside when it came down. He watched it settle into a landing configuration 2 kilometers out, kicking up ash in a wide, slow circle, and he stood in the gray light with his suit seals checked and his hands in his jacket pockets and waited. The channel request came through his suit comm. He answered it. Unregistered salvage operation. The voice was flat. Keth, that particular register of flat that wasn't bureaucratic neutrality, but contempt performing bureaucratic neutrality. You are operating without a valid extraction license on a union-surveyed body. You will cease operations and submit to inspection under Article 7 of the Union Salvage Accord. Marcus said, "We're operating under a geological survey permit." "Your permit covers soil assessment. It does not cover." "Soil assessment," Marcus said. "That's what we're doing." A pause. "Our approach sensors detected a precursor hull signature at this location." "That would be interesting if it were true." Another pause, longer. "This is Commander Vrass of the Union enforcement vessel *Kethalorn. You have 30 minutes to comply." The channel closed. Marcus turned and looked at the *Godsfall*. The hull was the same as always, dark gray, iridescent sheen, half-buried, patient, enormous. The iris where he'd first walked in was closed. The ship looked from the outside like a ridge. He went inside. The passive defense grid had already shifted. He could feel it, not hear, not see. Feel. The same way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. The ship had noticed the cruiser the moment it broke atmosphere. The ship had been watching it since. He went to the bridge. They'd been calling it the bridge, though the voice had once referred to it as something that translated approximately to the room where decisions become the ship's decisions, and stood at the main console. Priya was already there. "They're scanning us," she said. "I know. The grid is." "I know." She looked at him. "Marcus, the grid is it's not blocking their scan. It's asterisk answering asterisk it." She showed him the readout. "It's sending back a signal, a clean return. Hull material, standard rock formation, no technology detected." She paused. "It's lying to them." The ship, Marcus thought, had been waiting 40,000 years. It had developed opinions about how to handle company. He almost said something. He didn't. 28 minutes into the 30-minute window, Commander Vrass hailed again. "Our sensors are showing a standard geological formation at your location. However, given the anomalous permit history and the volume of personnel at a survey site rated for 2, we are proceeding with a physical inspection. A beat. This is non-negotiable." Marcus opened the channel. "Commander, I'd advise against that. That is not a response I'm required to consider." "No," Marcus agreed, "it's not." The Kethalorn powered up its landing thrusters. Nothing happened for 11 seconds. Then every light on the asterisk Kethalorn went out. Not one system, not a partial failure. Everything, thrusters, navigation, communications, life support backup. The ship dropped 2 meters before its emergency mechanical locks engaged, which were the only systems on a Union vessel not run on Base 12 digital logic because they were springs. The cruiser sat in the ash field, dark and silent, held up by springs. Inside the asterisk Godsfall asterisk, the interfaces hummed. Marcus opened the channel. The channel worked because the asterisk Godsfall asterisk was still running it. "Commander, I'm going to return your ship's power in 6 hours. You are welcome to remain at this location, but I would recommend filing a maintenance incident report and waiting for recovery. I'll send you some coordinates for a good repair station." The channel was silent for a moment. Then Vrass said, in a voice stripped of everything except the core of it, "What are you?" Marcus thought about that. "Soil assessment," he said. He closed the channel. They left after 5 hours and 40 minutes. Thrusters back on, navigation back on, the Kethalorn lifting in a wide arc and climbing hard through the cloud cover without circling, without a parting transmission, without anything except the shrinking shape of it on Priya's tracking display until it was gone. The ash field settled. The gray light sat on everything the same as always. Marcus went back to the bridge. The crew was there, all 5 of them plus Yara, standing in the white light of a ship that had just made a Union enforcement cruiser look like a problem it chose not to have. Nobody said anything. Cho was looking at the interface panel nearest him. Amara was looking at the ceiling. Riku had his arms crossed and his jaw set in the specific geometry of someone trying not to feel something large. Priya was watching her tracking display even though there was nothing on it anymore. Yara had her notebook open, but her pen was still. Marcus stood at the console. The ship's heartbeat ran steady under everything. He didn't make a speech. There was nothing to say that the silence wasn't saying better. They had come here as 6 people the galaxy had found inconvenient. They had watched a Union warship go dark because the ship they were standing in had decided that was the appropriate response. They had crossed a line. He could feel it in the room, the specific weight of a thing that cannot be undone. Not regret. Heavier than regret. The feeling of standing on the other side of a door that has closed behind you and finding that the room you're in is bigger than you expected. Nobody moved for a long time. Then Amara said, very quietly to nobody in particular, "Well." Just that. Just well. And somehow it was the right thing. The ship showed him what it could do on a Tuesday. Or what Marcus had decided was Tuesday. because 5 weeks on Verac 9 had dissolved the actual calendar into something theoretical, and Tuesday felt right for a revelation that changed the shape of everything. He was alone on the bridge. The others were in their sections, Riku somewhere deep in the propulsion decks, Cho running capability assessments on the weapons integration points he'd been circling for days like a dog that smells something buried, Priya in the comms array, Amara and Yara in what they'd started calling the library, which was a chamber 3 levels down filled with precursor data storage the size of a shipping container, dense and dark and humming. Marcus was at the main console. The AI spoke. "You have not asked what the vessel can do. I've been working up to it. You have been avoiding it." He didn't answer that. "The distinction matters," the AI said. He put both hands on the console. "Show me." It showed him. Not all at once. Not in a list, not in a briefing, not in anything as clean as a capabilities document. It showed him the way a river shows you what water does by running, by filling the shape of the thing it's running through, by being so consistent and so vast that eventually you stop asking what it is and start asking where it ends. The asterisk Godsfall could interface with any ship built on base 12 logic. Any ship, any system, any weapons platform, any communications relay, any Union station with a digital backbone. Not hack, not override in the clumsy sense, not break in and shout. More like, speak the language the system had always been waiting to hear, in the voice it had always been told did not exist. Every lock in the Union had been built assuming only base 12 minds would ever try to open them. The asterisk Godsfall was, to those locks, not a threat. It was a key. Marcus stood at the console for a long time after that. He thought about the Kethalorn going dark in the ash field. He hadn't done that. He hadn't touched a control. The ship had decided. The ship had assessed, evaluated, selected response. He thought about what that meant at scale. 12 capital ships, he thought. 6 destroyers. That was the fleet the Union could deploy to a single location within a week. He knew the numbers. He'd memorized them the way a man in a dangerous neighborhood memorizes the bus schedule, not because he planned to run, but because knowing the shape of things that could hurt you was the only form of comfort available. 12 capital ships. The asterisk Godsfall would take them apart without raising its voice. He should have felt something large at that realization. Triumph, maybe. The particular pleasure of being told the universe has decided to balance its books in your favor. He'd been thrown out by the Union, processed and discarded, and made small by 12 years of petty enforcement and smaller quotas and Keth administrators who'd looked at him like a problem that hadn't finished solving itself yet. He felt it. He noticed himself feeling it, the way you notice a smell in a room and then can't stop noticing it. He also felt sick. Power that large in the hands of 6 people who were, fundamentally, 6 people with grudges was not a plan. It was a fuse. He called a meeting. They gathered on the bridge, all 6 of them, the white light steady overhead, the heartbeat running under everything like a clock that had been keeping time since before any of their civilizations had figured out fire. Cho had a scanner he kept looking at and then setting down. Priya stood with her arms crossed. Riku leaned against the far wall with his eyes up, reading something in the interface panels that the rest of them couldn't follow. Yara had her notebook. Amara had nothing. She was the only one who ever came to the bridge with nothing. Marcus told them what the ship could do. He went through it straight, no framing, no softening, just the shape of it, the interface capability, the range. The weapons suite, which Cho knew already, had known for days, had been sitting on because he was waiting for someone else to say it first, which Marcus knew because he'd seen the look on Cho's face every time he came back from the weapons section. The look of a man carrying something too heavy to put down and too dangerous to keep holding. He laid it all out. The room stayed quiet. Priya said, "The Union is going to send a fleet." "Yes." "When?" The asterisk Kethalorn filed its incident report 4 days ago. "If they move fast," He looked at Priya. She'd been tracking Union fleet movements on the comms array since the cruiser left. 8 days, she said, maybe 10. They'll want to overwhelm whatever stopped the asterisk Alorn, which means they'll bring enough to overwhelm anything they've ever encountered. She paused. 12 capital ships, 6 destroyers. He'd gotten the numbers right. Cho said, we fight them. No. Marcus, we can. I know we can. He turned to look at Cho directly. That's why we don't. Cho's jaw went. He was holding the scanner so tight his fingers had gone pale. If we fight them, Marcus said, we are a threat. A threat gets treated like a threat. The Union spends the next 50 years throwing everything it has at us because that's what power structures do with threats. They don't stop. They don't negotiate. They build bigger. They build meaner. He looked at all of them. We'd be at war with the entire galaxy inside a year, and the only thing we'd have proven is that humans with the most powerful ship in history are exactly what they always said we were. What did they say we were? Amara asked. Quiet, the question landed in the middle of the room and sat there. Dangerous, Marcus said, unpredictable, unsuited for power. Amara held his gaze, said nothing. The silence stretched. Priya was the one who broke it. She said quietly, looking at the comms array readout on her handheld, what if we don't fight them, and we don't negotiate? Everyone looked at her. What if, she said, we don't do either? She looked up. She had the expression she got when she'd been running a problem and found the edge of it, not solved, just found the edge. The problem isn't the fleet. The fleet is just going to be standing here asking us to hand over a ship. She looked at Marcus. The problem is that they believe the ship belongs to whoever holds it. She paused. What if it doesn't belong to anyone? The white light sat on everything. Marcus said, keep going. 40,000 years of precursor science, Priya said. Engineering, medicine, materials, navigation, it's all in the ship, all of it. The library downstairs. She glanced at Yara. Yara had stopped writing. The Union has spent 200 years hoarding every fragment of precursor data they could find, classified, controlled, rationed to approved research institutions at approved rates for approved purposes. A beat. What if every species got all of it at once, simultaneously? Before the fleet arrives. Cho put the scanner down. Riku turned away from the wall. They can't suppress it, Priya said, if it's already everywhere. The broadcast took 11 hours to prepare. Priya ran it. Yara and Amara handled the data organization, 40,000 years of precursor knowledge indexed and structured so it could be received, not just transmitted, because a signal no one could parse was just noise. Riku kept the power system stable through what turned out to be a sustained output draw that would have burned out every ship in the Union fleet twice over. Cho ran a passive defense perimeter and did not say anything about the weapon systems, which was its own kind of discipline. Marcus sat at the main console. The AI said, you understand this cannot be undone. Yes. The information will propagate. Smaller civilizations will gain access to technology they are not prepared for. Some will use it destructively. Some will use it to survive. A pause. Yes, the AI said, some will. The Union used it to control. For 200 years, they controlled who got to know what, and they used that to decide who mattered. He looked at the interface panels, the markings he could almost read, the based-end structures that had lived in the back of his brain for his whole life without ever finding anything they could speak to. I'm not interested in doing that better. I'm interested in not doing it. The AI said nothing. The broadcast went out at 400 local. Every frequency, every relay, every Union comm channel, every independent station, every diplomatic band, every navigation beacon that could carry a secondary signal. 40,000 years of precursor knowledge, delivered to every species simultaneously. No encryption, no delay, no access controls. Just here, it's yours, all of it. The fleet arrived 9 days later. 12 capital ships, 6 destroyers. They came in formation, which was impressive. the kind of impressive that was designed to look like certainty. They spread across Verac 9's upper orbit in a pattern that said, "We have done this before and it has always worked." Marcus watched them on the navigation display. 14 kilometers of ship under his feet, the heartbeat steady, the interfaces alive. The fleet hailed. The voice was not Keth this time. Vral. High Council tone, the specific register that meant this was not an enforcement action. This was a statement of what the universe had decided. "This is Admiral Gen Voss of the Union High Fleet. You are in possession of a precursor artifact classified as Union Strategic Property under Emergency Resolution 7 Alpha. You will transfer command access to Union authority within 1 hour, or we will board by force." Marcus opened the channel. "The broadcast went out 9 days ago," he said. "Every species in the Union has the full precursor archive. Your scientists have it. Their scientists have it. The species you've been keeping it from for 200 years have it." He paused. "There's nothing to take." Silence on the channel. "The ship is still here," Gen Voss said. "The ship is still here," Marcus agreed. "Transfer command access." "No." The fleet held its formation. 12 capital ships, each 1 3 times the size of anything Earth had ever built, hanging in the gray light above a dead planet. The asterisk Godsfall didn't move. Didn't power weapons. Didn't charge anything. Didn't do what every instinct in a military mind would expect a threatened vessel to do. It sat. Patient. The way it had sat for 40,000 years. The channel stayed open. Marcus could hear the background noise of a fleet bridge running calculations, running assessments, running every tactical model they had for a scenario that none of their tactical models had been built to process. Gen Voss said, "You have committed an act of war against the Galactic Union." Marcus said, "I gave everyone a library card." The channel went quiet. The fleet held position for 6 hours. Then it pulled back. Not a retreat, not a rout, a withdrawal that looked on the navigation display like a group of very large ships deciding that the thing in front of them required a category they hadn't invented yet. Marcus watched them go. Priya was beside him. She watched until the last ship cleared sensor range, and then she looked at her hands, and then she looked at Marcus. She said, "That's either the best thing we've ever done." He said, "Or." She said, "Or." And neither of them finished it. Because some sentences are better left open. Because the thing they'd just done had already left the room, was already spreading across the galaxy at the speed of a signal, and whatever it became out, there was no longer entirely theirs. That was the point. That was always the point. The galaxy did not take it well. Which was expected. What was not expected, what Marcus had not let himself model, because modeling it would have required believing it would actually work, was the speed of it. The broadcast had been out for 9 days when the fleet arrived. By then, it had already reached 43 independent relay stations across 6 sectors. By the end of the first month, it had propagated through every major comm network in the Union, the outer fringe, and 2 civilizations that officially did not have contact agreements with anyone. 40,000 years of knowledge. Loose in the galaxy. No lid. The Union called it an act of war. Then they called it theft. Then, after 3 weeks of emergency sessions, during which apparently every High Council member had attempted to claim jurisdiction over a problem that had already ceased to be a problem in the sense of being containable, they called it an unauthorized information dissemination event, which was the kind of language that meant they had run out of words and were now building new ones to stand in the wreckage. Smaller species called it other things. The Meron, a civilization that had been locked out of precursor medical research for 60 years because the Union Directorate considered them a developing class member state, which was a phrase that meant not worth the access fee, translated the relevant sections of the archive in 11 days. Their xenobiology teams had 3 research papers published in 14. The gal, who had been trying to solve a propulsion inefficiency that was costing them a third of their fleet range for 2 decades, blocked from the relevant precursor engineering data by a union licensing wall, with a cost that only 4 species could afford, fixed it in a month. Marcus read the reports on the *Godsfall**S bridge. He read them the way you read something you hoped was true and are now finding out is actually true, which is not pure relief. It has an edge. It asks you what you do next. He didn't have an answer to that yet. Cho came to find him. Sat on the floor near the console. Nobody sat in chairs on the bridge. The chairs were precursor, and the geometry was wrong for human spines, and looked at his scanner without looking at it. He said, "The Union is calling you a terrorist." "I know. You're also being called a liberator." The Maron Council issued a formal statement. "I know. That's a strange combination. Everyone who's ever changed anything uninvited gets both," Marcus said. "The second one takes longer to arrive." Cho was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure you did the right thing?" Marcus looked at the interfaces, the markings he could almost read. "No," he said. "I'm sure I did the only thing I was willing to do. That's different." Cho nodded, set his scanner down, picked it up. "The weapons systems are still." "I know." "I'm not," he stopped, tried again. "I just want to know they're there." "They're there." Cho nodded again. That was enough for him. That was the most Cho had ever asked for anything, just to know the capable thing existed, even if you weren't going to use it. Marcus understood that. He'd been carrying the same thing since the first day he stood on this bridge. The dignitary arrived 6 weeks after the fleet withdrawal. A single diplomatic vessel. Small, clean, Union-flagged. A Vral envoy named Gaston who wore the particular expression of someone tasked with offering a deal they personally found embarrassing and professionally were required to present as reasonable. Marcus received them in the first chamber. Just him, no crew. The interfaces alive on every wall, the ship's heartbeat running under everything. He dressed in the same work clothes he always wore, which was a choice so deliberate it was almost a sentence. Gaston was tall, gray-skinned, with the careful posture of someone who had spent their career measuring distances between what they meant and what they said. They had 2 aides. The aides didn't sit. Gaston said, "The High Council has authorized me to offer the following." Marcus said, "All right. Full amnesty for yourself and your crew. Retroactive clearance of all charges related to the information dissemination event. Reinstatement of Union salvage licensure at senior grade, which would represent a significant professional restoration for." "That's the small part," Marcus said. "What's the main part?" A pause. "A permanent seat on the Union High Council, representing Earth, the first such seat in the history of the Council." Gaston let that land. It was designed to land. 60 years of humanity being handed the bottom rung, and here was the top of the ladder, arm extended. The Council recognizes that the current structural arrangement has been suboptimal with regard to Earth's representation. This would correct that. The chamber was quiet. Marcus thought about the Keth administrator, the review board, the manifest timestamp that was 90 seconds off, 12 years of petty small-making. He thought about the seat. He thought about what you do with a seat at the table where all the decisions get made, really thought about it. The way you think about something you want badly enough that you have to be careful. You become the table. That was the thing. You sat in that chair long enough and the chair got into you. You started making the same calculations, drawing the same lines, deciding the same things were necessary. You started looking at the GAL propulsion problem and thinking, licensing structure. You started looking at Maron medical research and thinking, developing class. Not because you were corrupt. Because that's what the room did to the people in it. He said no. Gaston did not blink. The Council. The Council wants the ship. Or if they can't have the ship, they want me inside the fence, which is the next best thing. He kept his voice level, not cold. I'm not interested in being inside the fence. Then what? Gaston said, and for a moment the diplomatic register slipped, and underneath it was something real, not anger, not contempt, genuine incomprehension. What do you want? Marcus looked at him for a moment. It was a fair question. He'd been asked it before. The AI had asked it. He still didn't have a clean answer. What he had was something smaller and harder to hold. He parked the asterisk Godsfall asterisk 3 weeks later. Not on Verac 9. In neutral space. The Drell corridor, 6 light-years from the nearest Union territorial boundary, in a stretch of nothing that belonged to no one because no one had ever found it useful enough to claim. He brought the ship in and held position and opened a broadcast on every channel. He kept it short. The asterisk Godsfall asterisk is here. It will remain here under human watch. It will not attack anyone. It will not be surrendered to anyone. It is not a threat. He paused. It's a reminder. He closed the broadcast. Priya looked at him from the comms array. A reminder of what? That we had it, and didn't use it to take anything. The room was quiet. Some species won't understand that, Amara said. No. Some will think it's a trap. Some will eventually understand it, Yara said. Not a question, she was writing. Eventually, Marcus said. That was enough. That was the only metric available for things that mattered in the long run, eventually. You didn't get to see it. You put it in the ground and trusted it would grow in the direction of light, which it might, or in some wrong direction you hadn't modeled, which it also might. Either way, the seed was in the ground. Either way, you were done standing over it. The night after the broadcast, he was alone on the bridge. The crew was asleep. The ship's heartbeat ran steady. In the Drell corridor, with no star close enough to matter, the viewport was pure dark with no cloud cover, no atmospheric scatter, nothing, just stars, dense and clean. The kind of sky you couldn't see from a planet or a station, the kind that only existed when you were in the middle of it. He stood at the main console. The AI said, "What do you want now?" Same question Gaston had asked. Different weight. Marcus looked at the viewport for a long time. The stars didn't move. They never moved on the scale a single human being could observe. They just were, patient and numerous, doing the only thing stars knew how to do, burning through the fuel they had, for as long as they had it, without asking whether it was worth it. He said, "Show me what else the precursors left." The console changed. The main display filled not the viewport, not a single screen, but every interface on every wall, simultaneously, a map that wrapped the entire chamber, star by star by star, each one tagged, each one marked with something. Sites. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Each one a dead planet, a buried moon, an asteroid field with a signature that didn't match its geology. Each one with a marker in precursor notation, base 10, clean, readable, that meant, here. We left something here too. The map kept expanding. Marcus stood in the middle of it. He was 34 years old. He had a cracked co-pilot seat with peeling cargo tape and a salvage rig that made a noise when she flew, and 6 people he'd trust with most things. He had a ship that was 14 kilometers of patient, waiting capability, and a galaxy that was, right now, arguing loudly about what to do with a man who had given it a library card. He had a map. He said, "How many?" The AI said, 4,211 confirmed. Estimated actual, significantly more. Marcus looked at the map. He was not done. He had known, somewhere below the chest, since the iris opened on day 1 and the light came on amber, warm, waiting, that he was not going to be done for a very long time. The ship's heartbeat ran steady. The stars held still. He had work to do.